good morning, everybody. Welcome to Friday Focus on this, the 3rd of October. Screen looks a little different this morning if you're used to our show, cameras and technology and whatever. So we're covering, you can see a bit more of the studio and office than you normally will. But thank you for joining us for Friday Focus. This is our latest episode. We will be talking to Dr. David Gutman this morning, but just to tell you a little bit of where we've got to, obviously we're getting into this, into the autumn and heading towards the end of the UK first term, and obviously around the world, other people are working in different orientations of the school year. Some interesting stuff going on, and there's much that we'll be feeding out over the next few weeks that we're doing, and interest is growing in the activities that we're partaking in. You'll see a slight rebadging of our work as the Friday Focus continues, our fortnightly show, which obviously we're here for today. That we are going to introduce a second podcast in the alternate weeks called the Leadership Compass, which will be focusing particularly on leadership issues across the weeks. So just if you see that come along, please do come along and join. It will be a premium chat on Substack initially, and we're looking to grow that. But also the newsletters that you've seen us producing or seen me producing come out. The Smart Curriculum Network has been rebadged, and I think we're on issue 48, 49, 50 now. But they are, I mean, astoundingly, the growth of that has really changed what we've been doing, and I know that it's found its way into into Japan and into the Asia Pacific region. I know that it's in Europe and Eastern Europe, and people are responding to the things that we're talking about. Now, the reason for part of the show this morning is to continue the theme that we have been talking about. And that's this whole idea about education with its economic future, preparing learners for the world as it is and the world as we see at the moment, what we can see coming in the future. So what it's going to be. So that idea of growing a different fit for purpose approach. Now, I am going to start by saying I am definitely not anti-knowledge or anti-content. The question is whether what we do is preparing learners for the environment they're going into, and giving them a taster and giving them the skills to approach that world. So please, I'm not anti-knowledge, definitely not. We do need that. But I am very keen to see the context grow. And in that vein, I've asked today Dr. David Gutman to come and talk about his experience. And you've seen the title of this show is vocational learning. I find sometimes that term is used by many as quite reductive. It reduces it to, but that's just the skills agenda. People that know me will know that I've used the term professional learning, preparing learners for a professional environment. And so this conversation to me is really important to someone that's been in the journey for the whole of their career and has got to the pinnacle of career. David's an ex-HMI, and has seen the world of education, not just the education in England, but has taken it a little further. Let me introduce David. And David, welcome to the stage. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Just give some introduction to yourself, David. Tell me some of the things. Tell our listeners some of the things that you've been involved in.
Well, I would like to, before I start, I'd just like to thank you, your colleagues and associates like Mina Wood, and people like Malcolm and Christine from Insight for all the work that you're doing on trying to work towards this a new kind of curriculum. Because I think the current curriculum is not fit for purpose for many students. Just to correct you on a couple of little things, I wasn't at not ex-HMI, but I was a contracted inspector for Ofsted.
Apologies. Yes.
And my journey has been more nearer 60 years rather than 40 years back. So what I've been doing over the years is I started very much as an English teacher, and then I found myself roped in, as it were, to take what became business studies subjects. I went after going to at school. I wasn't very bright. I left school after a year. I didn't do my A levels. I attended one history A level class before I gave up because I found it boring. It wasn't what I'd done before, because for my GCEs in the what is now year 10 and 11, I had done economic history, but there was no economic history available in the curriculum in the sixth form. So the curriculum was too narrow for me. It didn't suit me. So I left, and my mother said, go to work, David, it's better for you. You might as well. So I went to work for London Transport. I worked in their offices, a very boring job. I then asked for a transfer to be a bus conductor, where I could meet people. I had twice the amount of wages. The hours weren't very social. And from there, I then decided I think I'm going back to the 60s to make a change in my life, because I couldn't be a bus conductor all my life. And it was on Hampstead Heath, New Year's Eve, dealing with all the drunks at midnight. I thought I must train to be a teacher. So I trained to be a teacher. I got the B.Ed, the first year of the honours degree at what is now Middlesex University. And after I got my degree, would you believe I couldn't get a job as a teacher? So I went back on the buses. It was only when I was on the buses, again, I found an advert in the paper that said, come and teach in sunny Zambia. So off I went to Zambia, much to my mother's surprise, but she accepted it. In fact, she came out to visit me a couple of years later. I found myself teaching English, but one day the deputy head passed my window of the 3-bedroom house in the bush, miles and miles, about 500 plus miles from Lusaka, near the Angolan border. And he said, Dave, you could teach typing to a group of girls after school. I said, well, I've never taught it. He said, you'll be all right. So I had been typing away on the typewriter. That's what he saw during the window, because I took my father's typewriter. So I mugged up to the other fingers, which I hadn't been using, from a textbook which I found myself teaching typewriting. I lost an English class, which was good, because they were a bit falsy. I don't think they liked me very much. And then after that, I got roped in to teach office practice and commerce, because the district governor's wife was transferred, so I take all her lessons. So I carried on in that vein and enjoyed it very much, my experience in the business studies field. And then I got transferred, to my shock, after going on holiday. On the way back from holiday, the inspector found me and he said, you've been transferred. I said, where to? He said, to Colabo. I said, but that's the punishment school. I said, yes. He said, no, it's not a punishment school. I need you to teach accounting. I said, but I never taught accounting. But he said, well, it's on your CV that you did an ONC in business studies when you were on day release, when you worked in an office about all those years ago. I said, yes. So anyway, so I taught accounting, loved it. And 20 of my students got full Cambridge certificates. And then I carried on teaching it a bit when I got back to this country. When I got back to England, I became head of business studies in a school in Enfield, a school, and never looked back from there. I taught typewriting, I taught commerce, I taught business studies, office practice, all these subjects, and developed my own qualifications, like a teacher's certificate in typewriting. And of course, the typewriters eventually got replaced by computers. So that's how I came into IT, through the back door, as it were, or the front door. And from there, I carried on teaching. I got a transfer to a school in Barnet, and I was asked to teach as a peripatetic business studies teacher in several schools. Not very pathetic, but anyway. And I filled in gaps, and my boss, who was the advisor for Barnet, asked me to start a resource centre in the back of a classroom in Finchley Manor Hill School, which is now Compton School. And that's how I started. And then a couple of years later, funding was available to Barnet, and I was asked to start a business education centre in the teacher centre, which I had my own block in the playground, which with 8 people working with me, and I was the boss, sort of swanning around and telling them what to do. And I started a resource centre there with Inset and all these things, going out to schools as well as support staff. And I became de facto the borough's advisor for business. And I used to help interview staff and all that kind of stuff, and help manage the budget for bringing in new computers, which were replacing the typewriters, working with my colleagues, the other IT advisors and so on. So that's how I got into Barnet. And then from there, I introduced, when I was in the Business Education Centre, a simulated work experience course, because I felt that the curriculum needed to be more practical, more suited to children's needs. So local schools used to bring a number of students to the centre, and I had a setup like a pretend office with a pretend hotel, actually. And we had different departments, the post room, and wages and so on. And 2 students would sit in each department, and one would help train another one, then move on to the next department. And the whole thing was published by McGraw-Hill in a series called The Electronic Office. So that was very successful. The students enjoyed it. They felt it was more relevant to their needs. And that was something that I felt should be expanded even more. So I then got seconded onto TVEI, the Technical Vocational Educational Initiative, and worked to support schools in that way to try and introduce a more vocationally relevant curriculum. I also worked on teacher placements with schools. Project Trident was someone I worked for in association with Barnet. And from there, we were doing well until the government decided to change the funding system yet again. And I was requiring to be redundant from that job and to apply for a job in the school. So I applied for coordinator of vocational education in a large, challenging, comprehensive school in Barnet, which had 62 nationalities, 54% special needs, 75% EAL. And I got the post, much to my surprise, and became sort of in charge of 24 colleagues. We introduced GNVQ in the 6th form in 6 areas: leisure and tourism, health and social care, business, art, science, and manufacturing. And we threw out all the A levels. People were shocked at the time, but it proved to be a good thing, because the thing about the GNVQ, it didn't parcel up the timetable into small bite-sized chunks, because for many students, it's not possible, it's not feasible for them to learn in those 45-minute periods. They need an extended period of time, especially in things like manufacturing. You need a day, you need a half day. So you can make a clock, or you can make something meaningful and learn the real skills of life that go with it. And to my mind, the secret of the GNVQs and all vocational qualifications is the actual key skill component. The fact that you are working with others, you are in a team, you are improving your own performance, you are problem solving. These are what they used to call non-mandatory key skills. And you've also got the key skills of IT, numeracy, and literacy, which are mandatory. Those were the real things that employers are looking for when a young person applies for a job. And to prove that to myself, after I took early retirement from the school after 5 years. I became an Ofsted inspector for my sins, I know, but I did over 500 inspections, nursery, primary, secondary, further area. I think I was always on the side of the teacher because I know where the teacher's coming from because I've been there myself. And in fact, I'm still a union member of the NASCWT and treasurer of the local branch, and very much I found that when I was feeding back after lessons, that I was on a wavelength with the teacher because I knew where they were coming from. But in terms of the vocational curriculum, I'm still trying to foster it in various ways. I feel that in so many schools, the curriculum is so academic. It's useful for science, maths, English, but the other subjects tend to be squeezed out as an afterthought. But there's no real balance between having a vocational option and an academic option. Because going back to when I first started at Finchley Manor Hill, when people were doing the CPVE, they did it alongside other subjects like English, maths. So it wasn't just an option, it was something for all students to do. So
David, you've actually just mapped pretty much my own career. You know, I said to you earlier that I came into teaching in the mid-80s when CPVE and TVI were actually, they were just, TVI was just starting. And so my experience within design technology, within the sort of the workshop environment, I was brought into that too at that time. And so the experience that you've just described, that, you know, CPV learners were doing English and maths and sciences and you know some content, high content academic subjects alongside practical application, and you know TVI and Trident were there to bring that context, that place. So where does this work? How do we use this? And part of what we did at Smart Curriculum right at the beginning of when I was working with schools, we created what we referred to as the professional learning program, which was what you described of that real life placement. Take your learning into the work environment, see how this plays out in the work environment, and see how that learning works. It's really interesting, David, to hear. They were different days, weren't they? Things were different, and you know that leaders were looking for ways of encouraging learning and growing students' activity. So you know, seeing your CV and that you've done some typing or you've done some finance, and then can you come and do that with some learners? Really very different from focusing on content and you've got to deliver this, to actually respecting you as an individual with skills and attributes and abilities, and how that was used with learners. That's quite a different age to where we are now.
Yeah. And I'm really worried about current educational processes and the curriculum, particularly in the higher years, the senior year 10, 11, 12 and 13, because I don't feel, with my interactions with students generally, that they always have those key skills of being able to work in a team, being able to relate to people they don't know in an environment that is work related. Yes. And I feel they don't have the skills of critical thinking. They're governed by their mobile phones, they're governed by the internet, social media, and so on. They don't have the critical awareness of what's true or what's false, and there's both sides to one story. And I'm concerned about the curriculum, the way it's been sort of bite-sized into textbook chunks that are put down in the textbook as fact. For example, the textbooks talk about climate change is a part of what's happening and so on. So they don't say that humans have a small part in this. Most of it has been natural. They blame us for everything, and then they might say in science the things like vaccinations are necessary for the world. They don't say that sometimes they don't work and they are doing more harm than good. So people need to know all the facts, and I am very conscious of that, because when I was an officer inspector, at the same time I was also for about 18 years a magistrate in the youth and adult courts. So it was very much evidence-based. If you didn't have the evidence, you couldn't convict. And the thing is with education, in fact, we've got to have the facts, the evidence, but then you've got to be able to apply them. It's the application. My son is a lawyer, and when he was doing his training, his exams, the law exams are very much not just a regurgitation of facts, but you have to apply them in a actual real life situation. Yeah. So it's using the knowledge you have already got in a situation where it is developing competence in a real work situation. And this is what NVQs, of course, were testing competence, and they still do in a field. So NVQs, GNVQs, that kind of vocational thing, now developing to T levels and all these things, but they tend to be marginalized by many schools, don't they, and colleges?
They are, and it's this. This is why I have quite a difficulty with this vocational term, because it's seen as, well, knowledge is important and vocational doesn't matter. But actually, you've made a good point there, that, you know, if your son has done sort of his law degrees and he's gone through that, you know, the biggest question is asked of them is make your case, and you've got to take the knowledge and form it into the argument and have that critical understanding so that you can make your case. And I would have said that in an engineering room. Okay, you've got ideas, now realize your idea, show me that it's going to work. And in a room of 20 learners or 25 learners or whatever it was, each of them would have come up with a different idea, and they would have made their case. They would have built their idea, and, you know, they'd stand or fall on the basis that it worked or it didn't work, and then we'd get them to evaluate, and okay, it did work. And as most lawyers will do, they will debrief a case at the end of it and say, well, I made my case and it wasn't strong enough, or I made my case and I won because, and then they will use that technique over and over again. It's not that skills are this thing at the side that we don't need. You do need, you know, you've got to develop the argument skill. You've got to develop that ability to perceive what other people are saying and merge it with ideas. That's the, you know, and that I would say is the melting pot that school provides, where we can shape that. That's what you were involved in.
Yeah, and if you take a subject like business studies, which I've been very much involved with, as I've said, traditionally the old business studies syllabuses were very knowledge based in terms of things like marketing and finance, but when the GNVQs came in, they had to be applied in an actual business situation. So, for example, at intermediate level, I used to get students to start their own companies in groups. So they're learning how to work in groups. They're learning about problem solving. They're learning those key skills, communicating with each other. But they've also got to be enterprising and put into practice some of the theory they've learned the basics of. So they really learn about how to market a chocolate bar or how to where to sell things like that. And in fact, I didn't mention that. I think that when a few years later, after when I was still doing inspections and magistrate work, I did a PhD. It took me 8 years to do this, but it was on the suitability, I can't even say it, and relevance of GNVQs as preparation for employment. And I actually tracked several students, ex-students, who'd done GNVQ intermediate business in about 6 North London schools, including my own, into their workplace and found out how they were doing there, having done this intermediate GNVQ, and what did the employers think of them. And from that, I found that the employers were highly impressed with their young people. And there was one young lady who had been doing GNVQ intermediate and got a job for London Transport, working, interviewing people and getting people ready for track laying jobs. And she had left school after doing intermediate, but yet she was now in charge of the whole interviewing process, and the employer was highly impressed. Key skills, IT, communication, working with others, all these things, and problem solving. And so that just illustrates the point. But I think the other thing that came out of my PhD was the fact that there's no real parity of esteem between vocational, in inverted commas, and academic education. And until there is, this is what is going to hold schools back. School leaders need to respect the fact that some students learn in different ways. For example, students with special needs. There was an article in a Sunday paper a couple of weeks ago about a mother with 2 autistic girls, teenage girls, and she had to take them out of school to do homeschooling because the school curriculum was not relevant to their needs. They found it boring. The subjects weren't what they wanted to do. And so this is very much a problem with some students can't or don't want to or aren't able to, they don't feel able to learn in bite-sized chunks. So they need extended periods of time.
I mean, it's fascinating. There's 2 things I want to pick up on what you said. I want to shout out to the Wherry School. So we had Rachel Quick, Imogen Harvey on the show just before the summer. This is the Wherry School in Norwich. It's a special school, but I went to visit the school and I saw. So this is an all-through school. So it's a primary phase and a secondary phase. But they've got 6th formers in the special school. They champion the autistic specific skills and knowledge curriculum. So Imi has created with the team, or she's led. She's not just created it all. The team has created it, but she's led this curriculum. But very much exactly what you've just said, David. This idea that there were 6th formers with particular neurodiverse issues about state education and kind of knowledge. They needed something different, but they're now doing placements in employed situations where they're being valued for the skills that they bring, because they are exceptional and they are specific to the I won't name the particular company that's there, but they're actually doing work placements that are there. You know, it's really interesting to me to see people like yourself who have, because we've got, exactly as you've just said, this idea of, that the education profession has got to engage with the different type of learning. As I often say to leaders, you've been successful, you were good at school, you went to university and got a degree, you've been successful in the education system. So when I asked a head teacher some time ago now, you told me that 50% of your learners go to university. What do the other 50% do? And his answer, and I've written it recently, and it's his answer was, and he went, the room went quiet. So the head of 6th form and the deputy that was leading curriculum were there, and they were looking at each other. It was slight embarrassment, and it was, no one's ever asked that question. I don't know the answer. And it was exactly that point, what you're saying. We as educators, or some educators, are so concentrating on academic prowess and success and qualifications and academia that we forget that there's a whole population of learners that need something else, want something else, and actually are skilled for something else. And it's fascinating. And so, I think that's really why, David, I wanted to talk to you and to bring your length of experience and, so GNVQ, CPVE, TVI, and now T levels. It is exactly as your paper, your dissertation says, there's that disparity between the kind of prowess of academia against this word that, is vocational. It's okay, so it's not proper education. And I've heard leaders say, well, now we're going to do the proper stuff, where actually the learners, and many learners, are quite a few neurodiverse, as we would sort of label it now, just are looking for something different. They just want a different experience, a broader experience, a more context-driven experience. I think your paper is really powerful in that regard.
Thank you for that. And I think, for example, even my wife says to me always, I would have stayed on at school longer, because she left perhaps before she wanted to, because some of the subjects in the curriculum weren't relevant to her needs at the time. She would have liked to have done more maths. She was very good at maths, and in fact, two of her cousins had first-class degrees from Cambridge in maths and became senior executives in industry like PricewaterhouseCoopers and British Telecom. And so, but it wasn't suitable for her, so she left, and she could have had a better qualification. She could have ended up doing more things that she wanted to do. And I suppose the same would have applied to me, although I've done well in my life, and I thank God for that. But I perhaps could have done even better if I'd had a better choice of subjects at school that suited my needs at the time, because business was always in my blood. Because on my grandmother's side, my mother's mother was Irish, and she was a professional Irish dancer, and her father had a dancing school in Dublin, which he founded. So there's that vocational bit there. And on my father's side, his parents had a wholesale warehouse in Munich, which was meant that business was in his blood. So when he came to this country in the 30s, he had to come to this country. He was a kind of refugee in a way. He started a business and was very successful. And some of that rubbed off on me, because when my brother and I were in our late childhood, say about 10 and 11, or we started a pet company, and we started up the Acme Pet Company, and we bred mice, rats, rabbits, and sold pet food to kids coming around the door. We started our own printing press, which we bought in Adana 5.3, and set up all the form with all the little metal letters, and printed out cards and put them in shop windows. And we even went on the trolley bus with a case of Kitty Cat on a Saturday, two little boys on the bus knocking on doors in Willesden Junction, asking people coming to the door, would you like to buy a tin of Kitty Cat every week? Would you like a weekly order? And we even had a business name registered and with a certificate on the wall. And I suppose that's where the business was in my blood. So, which is why I ended up doing business studies.
And I read you called it Acme, so that appeared on the top of the list within the Yellow Pages.
In the Yellow Pages, that's right.
Yeah, that's business acumen for you. That's you're the first one that they go through when they read through the list. That's yeah.
But if I was a bit smarter in business, I might have made more money in life and not been doing well. But then I have enjoyed my life, and I've done what I think I was set up to do. Because the other thing, my brother and I, we used to play schools in our bedroom when we were about 7 or 8, with the teddy bears were our students and we were the teachers. I even typed out a timetable at that time, English master. Well, that was a mistake.
So but, teaching was in your blood too. It was just there too. Yeah.
So, and we had an inspector. Yeah.
David, I'm just going to pause for a minute because we need to just do the social part, but we'll be back to a conversation in a second. So thank you for being with us just now. If you are on YouTube, then please do like and subscribe. If you're watching on LinkedIn, again, please do like and share. We are on Substack. We're now on Spotify, and so where you're consuming this content will be in a number of different places. You'll know that we've got the Smart Curriculum Network newsletter, which is now available on all of those channels, and we're looking to grow this into, so the Leadership Compass will be coming soon. So please do like, share, and subscribe. It helps to get the message that I'm talking about with leaders of education across the system. So please do join the conversation. I'd really love to get your comments if you're watching, and we do try and respond when you're here. The look is a little bit different this morning, but the conversation will continue. So, David, thank you for the conversation so far.
Thank you.
What do you see? I mean, you've been involved in the change, and I know you've expressed some concern about where the education system is right now. You know, obviously our experience of GNVQ and the loss of GNVQ around 2010, that kind of time. I mean, I was involved at that time in a centre of vocational excellence. They were called COVES. We were developing the specialist diploma, and that all kind of died out. Yes, we've got T levels coming through, but they are really in the minority. I said something the other day, or I was looking for within a talk that I'm doing later in the year at the curriculum and assessment review. So Becky Francis looking at curriculum, that the top line says we want to maintain breadth and balance. And I went in and had a look at the qualifications set up. And, you know, at GCSE level, at Key Stage 4 in England, there are 385 qualifications. 167 of them are, 168 of them are GCSEs in academic subjects. 167 of them are AS levels, which from my experience in a few hundred schools are not used. And only 50 of them are what we would describe as technical awards. So the Cambridge Nationals, the BTECs, and various other qualifications. So to me, we've lost a sense of breadth and balance. There's not a balance between technical qualifications and academic qualifications. The mindset is very academic. How do you think we change that? What? Because you referred to it a moment ago, and it's what your paper is about, that kind of disparity between the two. What can we do? What can school leaders do to kind of redress that balance? You've talked about some of your experience, but in today's context, and I know you're passionate about it, and you know you talk a lot about it. What, you know, just practically, where can people go with what we have at the moment?
Well, the difficulty is obviously goes to the funding system that goes to schools. I think we need to have changes in the funding system. So the government itself needs to give priority to making this change so that there's more parity of esteem. And they talk about it sometimes. In fact, the Minister of Education visited one of my courses those years ago, the Simulated Work Experience. He said, "Oh, I'll mention this in my next speech," but whether he ever did, I don't know. The thing is, once there's some changes in the funding situation, so school leaders can try and press as much as they can through their organizations and communications for change in the funding system. But given that the curriculum, the schools funding that we've got, to make more flexible arrangements so that students have more choice themselves about what they're going to study from the start. Because at the moment, there's a structure which is constrained. I know what is not easy to timetable schools. I've done it myself when I was in Zambia. You have to have a very sharp pencil and a good rubber. But it's all done by computer now, of course, or even AI, I don't know. But the thing is, you need to give students more say in what they would like to learn. are they ever in schools given a choice of what they might like to study at the end of year 9 in the option system? Usually it's given to them as a list of subjects and they have to choose either science or maths or whatever it is. In my case, I had to choose the sciences, I had to choose the arts, like economic history and art, which I was no good at, rather than the sciences, math, chemistry, physics and biology. I wanted to take biology because I was interested in it, but I couldn't because it was too rigid. And I think that if school leaders can make the more flexible curriculum in school, so that students have more awareness of what the different subjects involve before they actually are asked to choose them. So there should be more drip feeding of things like vocational aspects into earlier years. For example, in my last school, we had an enterprise day in year 7, and we had the different days in different years. So students could get more of an idea of what the different subjects involve. So give students more choice, more power to decide their own subjects and not be so constrained with the curriculum offer. And I know it's difficult. I'm not saying there's an easy answer to it. Maybe AI will help. I don't know. Not that I'm
David, your experience. I mean, when I hear you saying those things, I recognise this idea of streaming learners to arts and sciences. I mean, that's been around for years. And the thing is, I find schools that are still doing it. I find schools where leaders are very academic and they know the GCSEs, but they don't know what the other qualifications are. There are lots of schools that are not using any of the 50 technical awards because they're substandard qualifications, or we haven't got people that can teach those. So that idea of the offer needs to be understood. And I work with schools and say, look, well, one of the issues that I would ask subject leaders that have got onto the upper pay scales to go and study. Look at what's available in your subject domain and look at all the qualifications that are there and present to us why each of those could have a place on our curriculum and which ones are fit for purpose for our learners and in our context. Yeah. And that, it's that we need to challenge the profession to look at a broader ethic. And the other, I champion exactly what you've just said. It's not just about options in year 9 and 10, in 9, 10 and 11. We need to start this process earlier on, which is where the sector skills councils and sector analysis in school and exposing learners to, the 15 sectors which the qualifications are divided into. Sorry, I'm getting into technical stuff, and every time we have these conversations, David, you spark things in me. These are the things that we need to be working through. It's not just about performance tables and EBAC, and hopefully Becky Francis and the review team will. I know they are evaluating that, but it's a question of we need to move and how do we as a nation release the possibilities for learners which have become very constrained. And it is, I said to someone the other day, do you realize with your English, maths, science and 3 option blocks, if you're going to insist on a language, a humanities and them doing triple science, they have no choice. And I've been into schools where that no choice has resulted in parent protests. Even one school some years ago, kids and staff and parents sitting on the field with placards saying, "My child's got no choice," because of the structure and the constraint of the performance table structure. And what you've said is really important. Children need to have agency. They need choice. They need their own aspiration to flourish so that fire can kind of grow. That's what's driven us. And I recognize that in your work, David.
Yeah, they all got talents that need to be released. And these talents are being bottled up by this restraining system. Yeah, and that's why there's so much more homeschooling going on.
Well, there's another story to get into, isn't it? I mean, that's so. I mean, I probably some will disagree with this, but I've said many times, the focus on behaviour hubs and attendance, that, you know, so we know that that's where the government is investing significant money. My personal view is that you need to look at the curriculum first, because we need to give children reason to make, or families reason to maintain the social contract. I'm here because I value this education and I want to be part of this. And why are they not attending? Why are so many families voting?
Why they say that? And not only that, Chris, there's been a growth in the number of students identified with ADHD, okay, things like that. But Ofsted itself said a few years ago that these figures are false, because a lot of students are labeled like that, and they're given that label. So I'm not going to go to labeling theory. That's one of my interests in sociology as well. But that they you know, don't, it's not relevant to them to be labeled like that. It's because the curriculum doesn't suit their needs and their abilities and what they want to do, and that's why they get disaffected in the classroom and get labelled. I'm not saying all of them, but some of them.
No, absolutely. And there is, as I was talking to someone the other day, that this is a spectrum, and there are people at each end of the spectrum, and there are people in the middle of the spectrum. I mean, the truth is, ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity, and it's that. Well, it's described as a disorder. I know from some of the podcasts that I listen to, that you know, focusing on neurodiversity, you know, that there is some concern about the labeling, but actually, if we think about the context, attention deficit is because they're struggling with paying attention in an environment where they're not inspired.
Yeah, it's not relevant to their needs. Yeah, or their interests.
Is it? I mean, neither of us are experts in that field, and I wouldn't speak to. I mean, that's why I brought Rachel and excuse me, Imi, to talk about it. But it does speak to, have we created an education system that's fit for purpose for the learners that are in it? I just on, because I was talking yesterday to a senior leader in a school in Hong Kong about sort of broadening this view, and it's certainly my view that other countries are starting to consider this not just about inspiration and aspiration, but this relevance and economic future. What's your feeling on that, David, in terms of what's going on around the world?
Well, there's a lot of interesting and exciting initiatives going on, as you pointed out, Chris. And I feel we should be more aware in schools of what other countries are doing, and there should be more opportunities for school leaders to perhaps find out firsthand some of these initiatives abroad. It might they could then bring them home and try and experiment with them and try them out here, you know. But it needs funding for that to take place, and it needs committed leaders who are going to actually put into practice what there's no point in going on a jolly or a course or something and not putting it into practice. You've got to spread the word, as it were. Well,
there's, and again, I've mentioned it already, and I don't want to overemphasize it. And it was some years ago for you, David. You know, your PhD paper, but it was looking at that. You know, what is vocational education and where does it stand? Now, there's no. I know that there are research studies that are being funded where educators are getting to look elsewhere and look beyond it. I was quite sad, and I had a conversation, walking down the street after a meeting with one of the notorious education leaders in the country, and I said, are you bringing international views into the work that you're doing? And the answer was simply no, we're too busy. To me that was a real shame, because I think there is great opportunity, that there's some amazing work going on in Estonia and Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and New Zealand, and we've been talking to the Japanese education policy initiative, and they're reevaluating and looking again. There's some brilliant stuff going on in Australia now. We're human beings. We are similar individuals, and it's strange that children are the same the world over. The context may be different, and maybe that was your experience in Zambia. Well, their life might be slightly different, but they're still children.
They're still children, and although it was a completely different culture for me, and I'm writing a book of my experiences over there, which one day will be finished. I hope that I last as long as the book, but yes, they're very much like us here. They want to do the things that we want to do, and they want to be a success in life, and they want the opportunities. And it's a question of getting the opportunities, but it goes right to the top in government. If you haven't got a government who's aware of what education is really all about, and look what's happened over the years, whether they're Tory, Labour, whatever they have been, they've all been the same. They've come out with huge amounts of verbiage in documents, curriculum documents, all sorts of Ofsted documents, things that students in the schools have to do and head teachers have to do. And so it's more and more and more red tape, more bureaucracy. That was another one of my interests when I did my MA in sociology at the Institute, was the bureaucracy deriving from the theories of Max Weber. If people are interested in that, they should look at his writings, a German sociologist, about red tape, bureaucracy, and how it becomes the be all and end all of the situation. And the real aims, the real education is put on the back burner just because you've got to go through the hoops of filling in that form, doing that in the right way. And for example, I do exam invigilation, and in the old days, you just went into the exam hall and made sure that students did not communicate with each other and made sure everything was quiet and so forth. Everything was fine. And it goes right back to when I was in Zambia where I did this. Now, there's about 100-page document from the Joint Council for Examinations about all the things invigilators have to do, etc., blah, 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 blah. And it's like a PhD thesis in itself that all invigilators have to read and do an exam on before they start invigilating. I think it's become ridiculous. Bureaucracy has ruled, and we need to row back and to get back to the basics of what is learning, what do students want to learn, what would they like to learn, and go from there.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously our experience of GNVQ, I mean, prior to NEAs or non-examined assessment, we were used to teachers getting involved in assessing coursework, that evil word that's now nobody wants to repeat, that it was a different world. And I know there's real concern about workload and growing teacher stress by going back to having more non-exam assessment. But the reality is, and I think you've said it several times, this kind of this staged assessment, that it's not all terminal or summary assessment, that there's assessment that goes on along the journey. And that was always said about GNVQ. And I know there was a gender issue that was talked about a lot. It was more boy friendly than girl friendly. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think lots of people like the idea of success along the way, which was a great loss to the system. That idea that we could do Unit 1 and it could be assessed, and Unit 2 and you could come back to it. Now I know those that are into sort of the academics don't favour that, because people got chance to do the units multiple times, and you could just limit that. There are ways of dealing with that. It's not about this heavy end of year, end of 2-year assessment, and then obviously what you say, and governments into compliance, governments into measurement. That's what they're into, and the systems will always reflect it, won't they?
Yeah, and it needs to go back to competence, the competence to apply, as we were saying earlier. And for example, with the very successful NVQs that are going on in the health sector, the student who goes into a health setting in a hospital or somewhere like that, they are observed by people coming in to see that they are competent in the situation, and their success in the qualification depends on that competence, not just in writing an exam answer. So it's measured over a period of time by someone who knows what they're looking at. And this is the problem. Even with exams, they're being marked sometimes by computers to the computer. The whole system of don't get me started on grading and assessment at GCSE, because at one time I was on the business studies panel for the University of London for CSEs, I think it was in those days, and we were looking at scripts, and we had to give a grade on what we thought the quality of the scripts was in the final exam. Then we were dispensed with, because the exam board said that we just do it by computer, and if it's 3.4% closer to last year's results, then that would be acceptable. Whatever it was a statistical exercise, no longer a qualitative one from the expert.
I remember the introduction of actually we go back to, you mentioned, not by name but his reputation, Lord Baker, Kenneth Baker, years ago.
Yes.
GCSE right. Introduction 1988.
Yeah.
Criterion reference assessment that disappeared so quickly, and exactly as you're saying, went to norm referenced. And people saying now, I asked the question in a paper I wrote the other day, what happens if every child got a grade 9? Because it's possible that every child could score, theoretically possible, it's unlikely, but it's possible that every child would score highly. Our system would not allow them to get all grade 9s, because the norm reference system has to have that spread. Now, the unlikeliness of it is that it would never be an issue, because there's going to be a spread of ability, and that's it. But the reality is there will always be learners that get grade 3s, 2s and 1s in the current grading system, because of percentage, and exactly as you've just described, that kind of positioning. Competence measurement is very different, and I think there is a case for looking at competency rather than measuring assessment criteria the way that we have it. David, we've chatted. We're almost at an hour. It's gone really quickly. I usually end with a question. If there was one thing that you would like to see change, and I guess we could probably guess some of that from how we've talked, but if you could make one radical change in the system, what would it be?
Well, I think I've really said that in terms of the giving children during the school journey more choice in their choice of subjects, more power to choose, so that the option system starts with an exercise to determine what the existing children would like to learn, then to see how the school resources might fit into that, rather than vice versa. We've got maths, or we've got science, or we've got whatever. You've got to choose this from here, and that from that block, and that from that block. So let's turn it around and give the children more power, the students, to decide what might be their own future. That's, I think, the biggest change I'd like to see. Let's have the funding to make that possible. And exactly as you're saying, that needs to be properly resourced so it is possible, and the frameworks to make it work. David, I really appreciate the conversation this morning. Thank you for being here. Your insights of a career in the education world are valuable, and your paper, and I look forward to the book. Maybe you'll come back and talk to us about that book of your experiences in Zambia. Yeah, if it ever gets finished. I'd like to thank everybody listening. If any colleagues from the past who've seen me or met me, all the best wishes to them, and keep up the good work you're doing. I know it's very stressful at times, and you need more support from on high. but keep going, don't give up, because the teacher in the classroom is the one who's going to really help the people of the future, the workers of the future, and the country, and all the countries of the world. Without great teachers, we can't go into teaching if we're not really committed to it. Don't just do it as a job. If you're just doing it as a job, give up. Get something that you really can be passionate about. But if you're really passionate about what you're doing, then you'll embrace all the things that we're talking about, I'm sure, in the future, given the resources.
David, thank you. Appreciate it. So we're just going to conclude now. Thank you to everybody for listening this morning. Thanks for being involved. That was a really interesting conversation from David about his career and the journey that he's been on. Well, we'll look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time for our next episode. And do get involved, do comment, please do share your ideas, get involved in the conversation, and we'll see you very soon. Thanks very much. Take care.